Greetings, English teachers around the world. It's time for another American TESOL Institute webinar hosted by yours truly, Jason R. Levine, better known as Fluency MC. And I'm really excited for this one, guys, because it's the first time ever American TESOL Institute has had a webinar focusing on preparing students for standardized tests for English proficiency tests. We're calling it top 10 tips for teaching TOEIC, TOEFL, and IELTS. But don't worry if you have another test you're helping students get ready for, English test. I feel confident these tips will help you as well. We chose these three tests for a couple of reasons. The first one being that they are so common around the world. So many English teachers out there are either teaching a test prep class for these tests or are interested in doing so in the future, or maybe you have a colleague that does. You can share this video out of the recording when it gets posted. The other reason is that I personally have many years of experience preparing students for these tests and training teachers to help students get ready for these tests. In fact, when I started teaching 25 years ago, I taught for only about a year, maybe 2 years max, before I was teaching TOEFL prep classes and Cambridge classes, not the IELTS, but the CAE and the FCE Cambridge tests. And since then, done a lot of other Cambridge tests, including IELTS, and especially TOEFL, and in the last few years, TOEIC. Lots and lots of TOEIC classes. So I think I can help you. Let's get started with the top 10 tips. We'll begin with what these tests are. So we're not going to spend too much time there because, of course, you can find out yourself if you don't know. And if you do know, we don't want to take too much time going through details about the test. But the TOEIC is a test to prepare students for jobs in general, right? There are some places that aren't maybe work environments that also want to know your level of business English, there we go, communication skills. That's what the TOEIC measures. It is traditionally, it's a listening and reading test only, but there is a speaking TOEIC and writing, which have been out for a while, but they are not very popular. So we're not going to talk about that. Most of the time, when people ask for a TOEIC score or students want a TOEIC score or need one, it's for the listening and reading test, which is one test with 2 sections. Here they are while I've been talking. I hope you've been reading. If you don't know what the tests are, the sections are. So it's one test with 2 sections. The first is listening and the second is reading. The TOEFL. Now, one thing that's really interesting about the timing of this webinar is that tomorrow, that's right, tomorrow, the TOEFL is going to change, July 26th, 2023. The TOEFL has not changed in quite some time. So this is a kind of a big deal. Tiny things change, but this is a major change. And yes, it's tomorrow. So not enough time if you are taking the test or you're helping someone prepare for the test tomorrow. But not a lot of details were shared about this until quite recently. So let's first look at what the test has been like. And don't worry, the change, even though the change is pretty major, it's very easy to understand, and it's actually good news. It's good news. So the TOEFL test format is 4 skills, right? So we have reading, listening, speaking, and writing. This is a test to prepare students for university study. It's the biggest one in the world for that, the IELTS being number 2. It's a very long test, but you'll see that's about to change tomorrow. So again, I'm not going to go through all of this. You can look at it here or pause the recording and go back or explore it further on your own. Here's the change. See, tomorrow, July 26th, 2023. What's going to change? Well, there are these three categories below, or not categories, but you know what I mean, right? Three ways that it's changing. The one that I want to talk about is the test content and overview, because the other they're more administrative or logistical things. So shorter test time and the new writing task. Let's compare that slide you saw before with what the TOEFL has been like. And by the way, this is the TOEFL IBT, just in case anyone out there is thinking about the more recent TOEFL ITP, which is a condensed version of the test that's used by institutions. It's not something you register for as an individual. I'm not going to get into that because it's also not as common as the TOEFL IBT. So this is the IBT that's changing. Okay. The biggest complaint people have had about the TOEFL is how long it is. Wow. 3 hours, actually a little bit over 3 hours. So now under 2 hours, what have they done? You can see they've cut the reading section by a lot, almost in half, right? Or in half, really. So then same thing happening here with the listening. So they're cutting it down. What they're saying is they're not changing anything. So that means fewer readings and fewer lectures and conversations, although it's not clear how many. We don't have that information yet. The speaking test is the same. And the writing is still 2 tasks, but half the time. So what is the new writing task? We are not privy to that information, or if we are, I can't seem to find it yet. So no preparation materials, as far as I can tell, have been released, just that this information is happening. I think that's because they're testing it out, but I may be wrong. So if you can find info on the new writing task, and basically that's about it, right? I think, and just let us know. Let us know. Moving on to the IELTS. This is, I don't think I even mentioned that if you don't know, TOEIC and TOEFL are created and administered by the Educational Testing Service, ETS. And that's in the United States. It's more American English, although the TOEIC has a British English, Australian English on it. The IELTS is Cambridge University Press, comes out of the UK, and it has a mix of accents on it, but primarily UK accents. So the IELTS, like the TOEFL, 4 skills and an academic test, but there's also a different IELTS, also popular, but not as popular, which is for general training. It's not business English per se, so it's not like the TOEIC. We're very similar to the IELTS academic. As you can see, the listening and the speaking are the same. So what's different is the reading section and the writing section. Okay, so I'll give you a few more seconds if you want to look at that. So these companies, ETS and Cambridge, are in direct competition with each other. And there are, of course, other proficiency tests out there, but these are very common. Cambridge also has FCE, the CAE, the one for young kids, which I'm forgetting right now, which I've prepared them for. It'll come back to me. Let's get to the tips. So sorry if I raced through that for some people. Sorry if I took too long on that for those of you who know the tests as well as I do, or maybe better than me. But anyway, let's get into our tips, which, as I said earlier, are designed to help you for any of those tests, the 3 tests we're talking about, but also I think you'll find them useful for other standardized tests, English proficiency tests you're preparing your students for. Number 1, know the test inside out. Now, it may seem obvious that you don't want to prepare students for a test without making sure they know the test and know what to do on the test. But notice I said know what to do, and is that the directions, what to do, or is that strategies, right? So we're not even talking about the English they need. This is a test in either a second language, another language, anyway, not their first language. So that means they're going to need to focus as much as they can, and very easy to be distracted by different things. The worst kind of distraction possible is the distraction of not knowing, what's going to happen in this section, what types of questions are coming, the directions. This needs to be, as we in cognitive, in applied linguistics, we don't even say it in cognitive psychology or something, we can talk about knowledge that is declarative and procedural. So declarative knowledge is when you are learning something. So you have to be very conscious of what you're doing. So that's how you learn about the test inside out. You go through it, make sure you understand it, and a lot of repetition. What happens then is that knowledge becomes procedural. It becomes more automatic. You put it back here, you don't have to be as conscious of it. So very easy to imagine, right? A student taking the test and their brain needs to focus on understanding the English, yet they don't know the test well enough. So they're thinking also about what's going to happen, or even if it's not consciously thinking about it, they're not able to focus as much because they're nervous about the test. They just don't know it. And the flip side of that is when you know it up and down, in and out, then you are much more relaxed and focused. So a very obvious thing, but something that I notice a lot of teachers don't spend time on. They kind of say, okay, here's the handbook for the test. Here's what you need to do. Maybe let's say, don't waste your time reading the instructions. You should know the instructions, but it's more than that. Let's take a look at that. What can you do? So you can do a true false. This is for the TOEIC. I have another one for TOEFL and IELTS. Also have them in game form. I'll show you in a moment. A great site where you can take something like this and make it into an interactive game. But so what do you know about the test, right? Find out what students know. Of course, you need to know all this stuff. This needs to be procedural knowledge for you as well. So you don't have to stop and go back and think what's going on with the test. So nice thing is if you prepare material like this, then by preparing it, you will yourself know the test very well. And to help students with strategies, you got to know the test inside out. So another thing is the examinee handbook or guide or whatever it is for the test. This is the one for TOEIC. This information can be found here. So another thing is you get the students to download the guide. They're free, and have students try to answer questions like these in a game and then have them look for the answers here, because as you can imagine, or maybe you've had this experience, just saying, okay, download the handbook, learn about the test, and then you launch into the English they need to improve for the test. Usually they're not going to do it. Also, these books, it really, in a second language for most students, it's not easy for them without help from a teacher to really understand what to do. Of course, it depends on their level, etc. TOEFL has something similar, test prep planner. And what I did with this is I created a game, Know the TOEFL IBT Inside Out. This is on Bamboozle. So I often talk, almost every time I do a webinar with the American TESOL Institute, I talk about Bamboozle. It's an amazing site. You can take the information there, put it there, like a Kahoot, but it's better than Kahoot. But if you have a platform you prefer for games, you should at this point, because wow, there's so much out there. It's either free or very, very inexpensive to be a member, and getting students to do interactive, repetitive practice with games for preparing for these tests, both for what we're talking about now, knowing the test, and also to practice questions and language for the test. Games are amazing, amazing, amazing. So that's Bamboozle with 2 A's.com. Here's IELTS. IELTS has more information. In general, we're going to talk about this a few times. ETS has much less information, especially less free information than Cambridge. Well, when it comes to TOEIC, it's a pretty difficult situation. But anyway, Cambridge has a guide for teachers and a handbook for students. Plus, they just have many more authentic materials for practice, which is a nice segue into tip number 2. So you need to know the test. If you're a student, teacher, right? You need to know the test inside out. And what else? You need to use real test practice material. Another thing that may seem obvious, however, there are different reasons why teachers and their students don't use authentic test practice materials. The first one could be cost. Second one, availability, right? And these are important things to take into account, but really, really important to understand that if you are just on the internet looking for materials for the TOEIC, the TOEFL, Cambridge exams, what's out there, even if it pops up pretty, at the top of the feed, can be really different from the real test, or it can look like it is, but then when you try to apply the best strategies for the real test, doesn't work as well. Or you've got students, learning vocabulary that's almost never or never on these tests. So this is really important to consider. It's much better if you don't have a lot of real practice material because of cost or availability to even make your own, or even get the students to repeat that material, because when they take the test, right, it's those actors' accents on the listening parts, right? It's those editors, those writers who created the material, and other companies, because they don't care, or because they're worried about copyright infringement, they are not producing materials that are really close to the test. So what does that mean? It means you need to really know what's out there. IELTS is the best of the three, because Cambridge is a publishing company. They're also trying to make money from publishing. They're a university press. They care much more than ETS about your students and their English. They're not so much of a money-making machine, which is paradoxical, because they are a company that publishes and makes money from publishing. ETS is a nonprofit organization, but in fact, it's really not. It operates much more like a corporation, and more on that in a moment. So IELTS, lots of stuff on their website, practice tests, and then books that are not so expensive. A lot of stuff. So just make sure it's, IELTS, or it's Cambridge. For example, this is Cambridge University Press. It's not IELTS, but because they create the test, anything that's Cambridge, the test IELTS has not changed dramatically in a long time. So you can also find older books and things for more practice. But yeah, you always want to check if it's real and if it's up to date with what the test is like now. And you can always compare it to what's in the handbook for the test. So TOEFL, we're going in order of best to worst. TOEFL was really bad at one point in terms of how much you could get that was real. There is more now. Some of it free, some of it, more of it, you have to pay for. So if you go to ets.org/TOEFL, you'll see you can download, I showed you before, the prep planner, but there's also a free practice test. You have to pay, I think, for the official guide now, but it's not that much anyway. There are more things you pay for, but it's worth it if you teach a lot of students, and you need to get their scores high or higher as soon as you can. So there's the official guide and the practice tests. Now, I mentioned before, TOEFL's changing tomorrow. So those tests do not have the new writing questions. And we need to find out what's available on that. I'm going to start researching that more going forward. TOEIC is notoriously horrible in terms of what's available for students. They used to publish past tests, TOEFL also. So this is an ETS thing. They decided that they weren't going to make past tests available, just a little bit of content that's real. So the examinee handbook has a few questions in it, but get this, the listening and reading sample test, it's not even a test, it's what's already in the handbook. So these are free. So, I mean, it would be crazy for them to charge you, but it looks like, wow, download a PDF of listening and reading sample tests. Look at the size of the file. So it is just exactly the same what's in the examining handbook, and that's not a full test. It's just sample questions. That's it. So what about if you go online? Well, if you look for, go online for test material, you'll see this. It seems really strange, right? Contact your local EPN office. You click this button, and in my case, in France, you get nothing. It really changes. Sometimes you get this. It's $53 or something like this. It's an online, it's not a book, it's an online practice. It has this assessment center. So for TOEIC, the good news is if you can find this thing, right, and you have the money to pay for it, there's a lot of great practice here. It's the real deal. Otherwise, no official guide. All that stuff you saw earlier for TOEFL, which is the same company, doesn't exist for TOEIC. And if the reason being that students who practice with authentic TOEIC material, and it is available illegally, I'm not going to talk about that, but students who do practice with the real thing or end up taking the test 10 times, they do very well, because when you practice with the real materials, you do much, much better on TOEIC. Tip number 3, do test practice under test center conditions. I remember when I first started teaching TOEFL, I had a private student, Japanese student, and in New York, and she was doing really well on the listening practice for TOEFL. So I was really impressed, and her listening seemed good to me in our one-to-one lessons, but she was scoring really low on listening when she took the real test. And so I asked her, I should have asked her much sooner, but I was just starting as a test prep guy, so I was, really naive. But finally, I was like, "What do you do when you're practicing at home? When you're taking a test, a practice test?" She said, "Oh, when I do the listening test, I do my laundry." I was like, "Excuse me?" She's like, "Yeah, I have my headphones on. The paper's here. I'm doing laundry. I fill out the answer." I'm like, wow. And how do you feel when you're doing laundry? She's like, "Oh, I'm really relaxed. I feel good. You said it's important to be relaxed, right?" I was, talking about that. I was like, wait a second. Then all of a sudden, of course, she goes to the real test. It's not like her experience when she does the practice test. So, you've heard of people that to get a better score on a test, they study in the same room that they're going to take the test sometimes. I think I don't need to explain more. This is so important, and really goes together, these 3 tips, when you think about it, right? So just to quickly review, knowing the test, inside out, using the real materials, and then when you practice, no breaks, no coming back and finishing, timing yourself. If the students can't finish in time, fine. Then let's see, what does that mean? Then do you want to go back and see, okay, you took it under the test conditions. Now we'll give you some extra time and see if you can make this kind of thing. But so important. So one thing about that is using an answer sheet, the real answer sheet. So if it's TOEFL, it's online. Right? If it's online, so they need to get used to that, right? Answering the questions online. So the online, the paper-based TOEFL practice, I would avoid it unless you have to use it, because they're going to take the TOEFL IBT on the computer. This is TOEIC and IELTS, right? There are situations where you can take those tests online, but they are rare. TOEIC is starting to get more common online. And there, of course, was what happened during COVID. But yeah, anyway, IELTS, these are paper-based tests for the most part. So if it's a paper-based test, and it's any other test too, what are they going to do on the test day? If they're filling in bubbles with a pencil, like the TOEIC, that's what they should be doing every time they do a practice test. Print it out, photocopy it. They should not be, doing it on their phones, writing it on a piece of paper. This will also help them with knowing the test inside out, because the listening section, the first 6 questions are photographs. The next section, right, they really need to get used. This will help them understand and remember the test. Tip number 4, do self-correction. Let me explain what I mean by this, because it doesn't really mean anything like this. So self-correction means if you I have a slide here for this. Again, TOEIC, since we just talked about it, it'll be easy to explain. But this is for anything, right? They should mark the wrong answers. So let's say 16, the answer is A. When you tell them 16, A, 17, C, 18, B, right? They should not be marking what the correct answer is. They should be marking that they got it right or wrong. Why? Can you imagine? So when students, and this happens so often, and it's a really, just this, by the way, I've had a couple students, their scores changed dramatically just because they stopped doing this. Because what they were doing is they were looking at the answer key, writing the correct answer, going back, if they even went back at all, going back, oh, that's why it's correct. That's why it's correct. That's why it's correct. Zooming through it. If you mark the question that you got wrong, but not the answer, that means you have to find your second answer. And this can also be done in pairs or comparing with each other. It can be a very cool activity. So if you get it right the second time, what can you learn from that? Oh, maybe that was your first answer, but then you second guess yourself, right? Or maybe you should have thought more about it. Or maybe you didn't understand vocabulary. What was the reason? So why did you get it wrong? Why, right? And if you got it wrong twice, that's really important to know, because then you really miss something important, right? Was it a trick in the test? Was it, again, back to vocabulary, grammar, listening problem? So this is, if you're not doing this, you can start this right away. So if the problem is if students are working alone, it's hard like to see the answer and maybe not remember that that's the answer, but you can kind of quickly read off the answers. They can mark, if you're correcting the test, it's no problem, right? But if you have a big group, I don't think you're going to be doing a lot of correction yourself all the time. Maybe occasionally, if it's something really important, like a mock TOEFL, TOEIC blanc, as they say in France, then maybe you will just be marking the wrong answer for them. That's great. Then again, they should be required to get a second answer. Small but big thing here. It really makes a difference. Tip number 5. So we're almost halfway through. I think we're doing well on time here. And thanks, by the way, to all of you watching live. If you have questions, comments, you can put them in the chat. And afterwards, we can talk about that. If you're watching the recording, you won't see that part because we will cut that out so people who are here live can enjoy the experience of interacting. And those of you who are watching the recording later will have, a more kind of easy to follow video. So tip number 5. Now we're moving from those 4 things we just talked about are really just, nuts and bolts, practical things that, don't have anything to do directly with, the English language, right? They're more the basics. Now we're going to get into strategies that have more to do with English. So here we are talking about pronunciation. But is it just pronunciation? Mark and practice word stress, sentence stress, and intonation. Well, it's pronunciation, but that means listening. So if you're taking a test like the TOEIC, you think, well, I don't need to practice my pronunciation. That's not true, because if you are not practicing pronunciation, especially word stress, sentence stress, intonation, what's going to happen is you won't be able to catch enough of that TOEIC English or TOEFL English or IELTS English. So mark and practice word stress, sentence stress, and intonation. Let me show you what I mean by that. And it also affects students' reading, because if they're reading and they can kind of hear how it sounds, they're going to be able to recognize words, and they're going to be able to read more fluently and accurately. And it also affects writing for the same reason. So word stress, of course, this is primarily listening and speaking, right? But it does affect those other 2 skills a lot. Another quick story. My daughter, when she was little, she's like, Daddy's using his pewter. She never said computer, because she didn't hear computer, right? So like I teach in France, a French person might say computer, right? They're not going to catch it all the time. So it happens again and again. You have a student who prepares for one of these tests. They do the listening, and they do a listening of a conversation or a lecture, and they think, God, I don't understand a lot of that. Must be, new idioms or just other vocabulary I don't know, or the country, the accent, or the speed. And then they look at the script, and it turns out it's none of those things. What it is, it's words they know. It's grammar they know. Fast, I think that idea of it's too fast, I mean, sometimes it can be too fast, but it's back to the rhythm. They're not sure, the stress is unfamiliar to them. They don't think about it enough. So one thing is raising their awareness of where it is, and another is getting them to practice it. So I just to make sure this is clear, the reason it says part 1, this is part of my material that I've written for TOEIC, right? So arranged, removing, right? Set up, located, installing, get them to practice word stress, sentence stress. So every word in English has primary stress somewhere. Don't worry about secondary and tertiary stress. We just find that stress, and then also in the sentence. Now, luckily, there is a pattern. You, I am sure, know that in English, the words that are stressed are usually the words that carry the most meaning. They're the most important. They're the ones that students need to catch. That's fluent listening. If they're listening for all those little words that shrink and link together, they're not going to catch it. So it's raising their awareness that the stress is there, and then listening for it, right, in the word and in the sentence. So this is part 1 TOEIC again. There's a very, very recognizable pattern. A woman is reading a magazine, right? So a woman is reading I think that are really long. Some people are attending some people are attending a seminar. Word stress, sentence stress, need to stop here, or else I'll go. I have webinars about this. If you look, American TESOL Institute and my own stuff on suprasegmentals, there we go, including intonation, which I'm not going to talk about here just because we don't have much time. But if you look into intonation patterns in English, they're not difficult to teach students, where the voice rises and falls, which is not the rhythm, it's more the melody of the language. So you can do things like this. You will never see test material with the stress mark, but you can mark it yourself. You can also have students mark it. If you're worried because English is not your first language, or maybe English is your first language, but you're still not aware enough of where words are stressed. I understand that, but it gets easier as you look for it and you practice it and you listen for it, right? You listen for it, and then you can mark it, and this connecting what it looks like with the bold or underline or a circle or whatever you want to do, how that connects with how it sounds, really important to have the visual as well. Tip number 6, shadowing a dictation. These are 2 procedures that have really helped a lot of my students over the years. And well, let's get right to it. What is shadowing? What is dictation? So I call it self-guided because this can be what's something students, if you have private students, if you have students who want to do more practice outside of class, you do not need to be there as a teacher to do this with them. This is something they can do on their own. You need to explain it to them, show them how they can do it, but then they can do it on their own. Shadowing means imitating. Right? Imitating what you hear, right? Repeating what is said. So this is a speaking exercise. The first thing I say here is very important. Use listening material you've already done as test practice, right? Find a conversation on the IELTS or a lecture on the IELTS, for example, that's really difficult. You as a student, or if you're a student or a teacher working with students, they had a hard time with it. And if they had understood it better, they would have, answered more, had more correct answers, right? And then what do? Play, pause, repeat, right? Wherever you want to stop, it could be after the first sentence or somewhere else. So this is from the IELTS, right? So maybe it's play. Good morning, everyone. We're very pleased to have you here at Lunar Realm. Probably pause. Repeat it. Or maybe, good morning, everyone. Pause. Good morning, everyone. Play. We're very pleased to have you here at Lunar Realm for our September celebration day. Pause. We're very pleased. Okay, that's shadowing. If you can mark the stress, even better, right? Does it take a long time? Depends how much. But again, you don't need to do the whole conversation. Here's the whole conversation. Maybe it's the second part here. Or maybe it's just a few sentences and you want to hit sentences in different listenings. Many ways to do this. Dictation is something I would recommend, particularly for students who are really struggling with listening. It definitely takes more time than shadowing, but it is really a powerful technique. So similar to shadowing, except what are you doing? You play, you pause, you write. You play, you pause, you write, especially trying to catch those stressed words, right? And check, did you miss any words? You check the script. This is why it's self-guided. They can look at the script themselves and see how close they were. This can really boost students' listening skills. And it's why dictation is just such a tried and true way to improve language skills. It's used all over the world. Unfortunately, it's often very boring how it's used, just, write down what I say. This, is much more dynamic. You can play games with it too. That's getting into, I don't want to go into like all the various ways you can do dictation, but this works really well. And after that, they can shadow. Then they can look at the script and shadow. Tip number 7. So we haven't talked a lot about vocabulary building. We're going to do 2 tips on vocabulary today. So collocations are word combinations that appear with high frequency, chunks of language, right? Like we say build vocabulary. We don't usually say construct vocabulary, develop vocabulary, enhance vocabulary. Would we say, for example, better vocabulary, to better something? You can better your vocabulary. So for example, it can be a verb and a noun, like build vocabulary. It can be adjective plus a noun. Let's look at what we're talking about here with collocations. So here's a reading from TOEFL. And traditionally, what students do, and many teachers do, is just think, what words do you not understand? Write the word on a list. Maybe get translation in your language, memorize this word. So next time you're reading, you'll know what it means, or when you listen, you know what it means. But the reality is that language is chunked into collocations. That's how we really get meaning from something. So agriculture, right? Evidence of agriculture. That helps you with the word evidence. It helps you with the word agriculture. And that's how you're going to see it. Now, not every time. We also have what? Spread of agriculture. So identifying collocations, helping students identify them and recording them as collocations in a vocabulary notebook, huge for reading fluency, listening fluency, right? And also to remember the vocabulary. It's very hard to remember words in isolation. They don't appear that way. Not everything is a collocation, obviously. Sometimes words we put together, it's not so common, but not on these tests, right? These tests, they have, their language corpus, what they're working with, they are going to refine it. They're going to make sure that it's high frequency stuff most of the time, right? And then words that are not so important, like millets, sorghums, right? Those are not recurring. Those are not going to be in the questions are going to require understanding of what you see here, right? So settled in bands, maybe bands, you think, okay, that's music. Maybe in the vocabulary, you realize, okay, settled in bands, settled in groups, in tribes, right? Be careful when you go online looking at TOEFL vocabulary. It's like I said, isolation. This one is, frankly, I thought I would not be shocked by how bad stuff is out there right now. But this is the first thing that came up. There were a few others that were not as bad, but still, just the word. Here it has the part of speech, and look at these words. I can tell you right now, more than half or about half of them are either not ever on the TOEFL or are like very rare on the test. So be careful. This one's a little better. It's from Cambridge for the IELTS. But still, part of speech, not as important. We're going to talk about that in a minute. In this type of situation as learning how to build words, anyway, we'll get to that. But you have an example sentence. So look, able to go. Hey, there's a collocation. But most of them don't have any examples. And sometimes when there's an example sentence, even though the collocation might be in that sentence, the chunk, it's hard to see it. So really important to focus on collocation. So I've been writing for a few years. I just haven't had time to finish it. A TOEIC vocabulary dictionary that includes a section on collocations. So I have it. You can do something yourself. I strongly encourage it, you and or your students, collecting them. Better to do it together, right? From the authentic materials, I repeat, from the authentic materials, that's what this is. Anything you see here, the examples, this is just the table of contents. And then here, a little sample from the verb noun section, just the A's. These are all from the real test, from the TOEIC. The little dot here means it's super common. See it very often. So sometimes it's not about knowing needing to know the meaning, except an award. I don't think most students have a problem understanding that. But will they catch it when they listen? Accept an award. I'm also working on doing this where you can see the stress. He accepted an award. Will they catch it with the stress? And the other thing is back to reading. I said this, but let me say it again. It's so important. Even if they know the meaning, they need to be ready to see it as a collocation because it'll be so much faster. They'll be so much more efficient at reading, fluent listening when they are learning collocations and the collocations that are on these tests. I said there was another tip on vocabulary, and I alluded to it just a moment ago about building through the forms of the words, the part of speech, noun, verb, adjective, adverb. Well, how do you do this? Well, I like, for starters, to look again, like we did with collocations, and try to see, are there any words here where there are other word forms, other parts of speech? And best part, if it's one that they know, maybe they don't know the word here, but they know, and purified is a great example, right? They might not know purified, especially when they hear it, but they probably know pure. Or if they don't know, that's an important word, easy to teach, right? With lots of great collocations, right? Pure energy, pure, I can't think of any right now. Leave some in the comments, guys. But anyway, pure water, but I think we're talking about water here, right? So if you purify water, that's the verb. Oh, and here it is as a participle, right? So I've just highlighted words that have suffixes, right? For adjective, microscopic, undesirable, right? Also with prefixes that change the meaning, un, dis, right? Here's un again. If you take a test like the TOEIC, there are actually questions directly asking you for the word form. So for TOEIC, this is huge, not just to become a better reader and understand vocabulary, but because you also have to know which form of the word to complete a sentence. Notice here also, question 105, what do you need here? Collocation. Only one of these adjectives collocates with dies. I think you know which one. So the TOEIC actually has questions, collocation questions and word form questions. But even though the TOEFL and the IELTS don't have questions like that, they still, like I said, it'll be faster when you know collocations and forms of the words to read. You'll read more fluently and more accurately. Yeah. And there are also vocabulary questions on the, I shouldn't say IELTS. What am I saying? IELTS does have questions where you need to fill in forms of words and collocations. So of course that tested well. It's only the TOEFL that doesn't directly test knowledge of collocations and word forms. So definitely there needs to be a resource like this. This is a list of mine. It's not the best. I like it because it's not as long. It doesn't have every possible suffix. but it has, I think, the most important. But just, trying to memorize these endings is not enough, right? It has to be something, like I said before, in context where you're helping students see the word forms, vocabulary notebooks where they're keeping track. And even better, a little shameless self-promotion here. Also, I told you I'm making this TOEIC dictionary. So this is something you can do as a teacher. This is what I did, and now I want to develop it further, right? But you can, again, focusing on the language that's on the test. So in this case, TOEIC, not every verb, noun, adjective, right? You take things that you see appear frequently on the test, like the adjective able, which has a little diamond, meaning it's very, very common. I have to get my symbols straight at some point, but anyway, right? And then able to do, able to go, able to understand, lots of collocations with the infinitive with able or unable. Ability, enable, those are also common. No adverb form, or if there is, it's not used, ably. So I don't put the adverb form or the adjective, as you see here, noun for absolute, if it either doesn't exist, or it's archaic, or maybe it exists, but it's not going to be on the test. Always back to the authenticity and focusing on the real stuff that's on the test. 2 more tips. Here's tip number 9. 9 and 10 are about speaking and writing. So if you go on YouTube and you look at preparation for speaking tests, especially the TOEFL, TOEIC doesn't have one, so we won't be talking about TOEIC right now. We'll be talking about TOEFL and IELTS. You will see, basically outlines, ways students can kind of plug in what they want to say or write based on the instructions for that speaking question, right? The parameters, the types of questions. So for example, TOEFL has different questions in the speaking part, the 4 different questions. They're predictable. It's back to knowing the test, right? Knowing that one of the questions, you're going to read something and then you're going to hear something a lecturer talking about it, and that lecturer is going to cast doubt on what was in the reading. So you need to be prepared with language to show contrast. However, nevertheless, on the other hand, same thing goes for writing. Now, if the test for speaking has, you're with a real person, like the IELTS. So the IELTS, you don't record your voice into a computer. So you might think it's not so much of a template situation because you don't know what the person's going to say or how it's going to go. However, those meetings, those, I'm forgetting what they're called. Anyway, your speaking test with the Cambridge interlocutor, it'll come back to me in this, I'm sure. That speaking test, it's very formulaic. So it's also possible, and you should encourage students to create some kind of outline template that they always use, they always practice with, and that way their language is not all over the place. So it's a little bit like, back to that idea, it's not a little bit, it's exactly like what I was saying earlier about declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. They need to think about their ideas, right? They need to think about the vocabulary for the particular question. This one is from the TOEFL, the first speaking question, is expressing your opinion. So you don't know what the question is going to be, but you do know that you need to state whether you agree or disagree. You need to have reasons, and you need to have examples or details, as they say here. So that means you can have a template in advance. If that becomes procedural, meaning it's automatized, right? Then you can deliver that with high accuracy, confidence, right? The pronunciation, or if this is reading, everything I'm saying now here, also reading. That's important. So it's also the same, right? If you know the type of essay you're going to have, and you do know the type, you can create a structure, an outline, a template that you follow. So let's see, what could you do for this? This is a template I usually use for the TOEFL for the first question. Students can change it, right? Especially how strongly they feel. Are they going to agree or disagree? The first reason for my opinion is, the first reason I feel this way is, firstly, right, different templates. So it can be creative in the sense that you can help students make their own, but it's not creative in the sense that they should not be all over the place each time thinking about, oh, I could say this, I could say that, right? That's not what you want in these situations. That's going to be too distracting. They're going to make too many mistakes that way, and they're not going to be as confident. So we've got the reason here, an example, moreover, in addition, idea, second reason, example, and then here the kind of counter argument rebuttal, right? So let's look at that. I'm not going to read through this. I'll just talk while you look at it. But you see in red, we have the template, and the black is what the student says, a very high level response. This is my response, but this is the kind of thing they need to be practicing, right? If they got their template automatized, whether it's speaking or writing, they can focus on everything else about the question. So the directions are set up in a way that you can make templates, right? You always know you're going to get a question like this every time. They do not mess around with that unless they change the test, like they're changing the TOEFL. There's a new writing tasks. You've got to figure out what they are. But no matter what they've done, it's going to be something that they're going to continue to do. And that's why you can set it up like this. Tip number 10. Tip. Here we go. The last webinar I did was about ChatGPT in the language classroom, how teachers can use ChatGPT and help their students. There's so many amazing things going on with AI and language teaching and language learning, and test preparation, no different. So this is something I could go on about for a long time. Probably want to do a webinar just on using ChatGPT to prepare for tests. That's something I know I will do, just a question of when. So this will be very condensed version because of time and because I haven't developed all my ideas for it yet. So let's talk about the most basic thing you can do, the easiest thing you can do, and probably the most effective thing. And that is connected to that idea of templates, getting ChatGPT to churn out sample essays following a template. And it can also help you get the template in the first place, right? Here's an IELTS writing task 2 question, right? So it's going to be different each time, but what's not going to be different is like what problems, what measures, basically like, what's the problem, what's the solution, right? That's a standard type thing for IELTS. So you need to get used to essays like that. So can you go online and find websites with sample essays like this? Yes. Can you find good examples for IELTS and TOEFL? Yes. Also bad stuff, but you can do that. People were writing those, right? Now, large language models can write them. And the difference is you can tweak them yourself. You as a teacher can mess around with them. That's what I'm getting at here. So I asked ChatGPT to give me an essay for this. I just gave ChatGPT what you just saw on the slide before, right? I like to say hello to it. I know you don't need to. And I use please and thank you, but you can help the students do prompts also. Let's have them learn polite English that they can use. Anyway, what I got was horrible, terrible. Not because it didn't have good ideas in it, but because it was so long. The level was way too high. Look at this, as a critical global issue of utmost importance. Blah, blah. And it's because I didn't, and I show you this because this is how I do it. Because I'm still getting used to it. I'll put in the original question like this, and then I'll see how I need to tweak it. So how do we need to change it? Well, it says write at least 250 words. This was like 500 words. So we need to say what? Write, between 250 and 300, right? That's number one. Number two, tell ChatGPT this is for, you need simpler English. This is for students preparing for a test. Their English is low level. So anyway, I did stuff like that. I won't keep going. I think you know what I mean. And I got this. Oh, also, I told take out introduction, body, the numbers, right? So don't get discouraged if that happens. You just keep talking to it, keep, playing with the prompt, adapting it. And this is what I got. Short body paragraphs. And look, firstly, additionally, furthermore, because I also told it, give me some very simple linking words, conjunctions. So it's a little bit long. I think it's like 180 words, 280 words. It's really good. The level's still a little high, but I did this for students who were pretty high level. So you can keep telling it, no, shorter, simpler. So that's just a great, great thing. And what I've found, and then we're going to get to correction. But before I forget, what I've found is students who have, I mentioned this in the last webinar, students who get a lot of essays from ChatGPT that are about their level, but completely correct English, and maybe even a little above their level because it's correct, but that it's possible for them to write. They're not going to obviously on the test memorize the essay, the topics change and be able to do it. It's not this, but if they're repeating it, if they're reading it and practicing it, they are going to remember. My students have, I've seen this, it's amazing. They will retain that template. They will remember the structure. They will remember a lot of those connecting words. So it's amazing. The second thing is editing. Right? So this is not from one of those tests. This is from a test at a university. This is actually the same example I used in the last webinar. But look at this essay. It's got a lot of mistakes. Look how it's set up. I told ChatGPT to rewrite it. And this one, really didn't change. You probably want to put everything at the beginning into one introductory paragraph, which I could do, or I could tell the student to do. But basically I said, and you can do this when this is something obviously that you can't go on the internet and do. I used to have to pay people a lot of money, or you would have to correct it. But look at this. I asked ChatGPT to identify the changes. And this is pure gold. Hey, there's my collocation with pure. It's amazing. So how long would it take you as a teacher to do that? And it's good stuff. It's very clear. I love it. I love it. And you can also, if you don't love it, if you don't think it's clear enough, you can ask ChatGPT to rewrite it, or you can make changes yourself. So students getting feedback that quickly about essays and speaking practices coming from AI, it's going to be a game changer to the point where they're going to change the test also. Because it's, obviously you can't use ChatGPT on the, sorry, now I'm getting away from it. You can't use ChatGPT while you're taking the test, but what's going to happen, and it should happen, is that if students practice enough with the English that ChatGPT produces, which is such great high frequency, collocation-filled English for the most part, it's going to improve students' writing and speaking. It's input, and then they're going to be listening to it and being able. It's just going to improve their language skills immensely. So, will we need those tests? It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the future. Why do I have so many? Whoa, there we go. I guess I put too many slides there. My friends, we are getting close to the end here. Basically, we've reached the end. Those are the 10 tips. Again, apologies if I went too fast, but you can go back and look, or if I took too long on anything there. I'll leave you with my credo. Practice builds accuracy. Accuracy builds confidence. Confidence builds fluency. Think about that in terms of what I talked about today with you. And as always, what we learn with pleasure, we never forget. Enormous thanks to you if you were here live, and enormous thanks as well to anyone watching asynchronously. American TESOL Institute, thank you on behalf of all the teachers watching. We thank you for this webinar series. So great that you support it and we do it. And we'll have another webinar next month in August. English language teachers worldwide, thanks so much. Have a great day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Peace, respect. Bye-bye.